A luxurious car drives along the mountain road. Inside, there's a couple, a young beauty in a wedding dress and an older man. The girl is happy, having stolen his heart, while he has taken her away from all misfortunes into his secret world. Ahead is a house set in a beautiful location, mountains, trees, and a blue sky. They are greeted by housekeeper Claire and a young man whom the owner calls Oliver. Elizabeth is enchanted by the beauty of the house. Huge glass windows, coziness, and comfort. At the entrance, she sees wonderful flowers, white orchids and lilies, and she realizes Oliver is blind. An evening dinner features a lavish table and well-trained servants, and a night of love follows. In the morning, her husband shows his young wife around the house, displaying its expensive decor, paintings, and precious art pieces. There is a luxurious wardrobe filled with fashionable outfits for her, a wonderful kitchen, and rooms more beautiful than the last. All the doors have biometric locks. In one corridor, Elizabeth sees a frosted glass door and asks Henry what lies beyond. Her husband replies that it is a place she must not enter. The girl protests. She couldn't even if she wanted to. After all, there are locks everywhere. Henry explains that all the biometric scanners are set to the parameters of two people, hers and his. The next morning, Henry leaves. Elizabeth is sad, as it is their honeymoon. She swims in the pool and wanders around the house. Elizabeth asks Claire how long she has worked there and, feeling shy, inquires why such a prominent scholar as Henry married someone as ordinary as her, but the woman does not answer. Elizabeth spends the day reading, trying on outfits and jewelry, and dancing before the mirror. In the evening, she sees Claire and Oliver leaving the house. At night, insomnia torments her. She leaves her room and wanders through the house, unknowingly arriving at the forbidden room. Curiosity overcomes common sense, and Elizabeth steps inside. Behind the door is a room resembling a laboratory. Sensors and devices surround her. Elizabeth presses a button on a panel, and suddenly a door opens, revealing a glass capsule containing the body of a young woman with a tube in her mouth. It appears she is sleeping. Terrified, Elizabeth runs away, knocking over a table and cutting her finger on the glass. In the morning, Henry arrives. He plays the piano for Elizabeth, but quickly notices her distracted thoughts. He sees her bandaged finger and asks what happened. Elizabeth excuses herself, claiming she is clumsy. Henry calmly retorts that she lies so well, it's frightening. Elizabeth is hurt. Her husband has easily uncovered her deception. At night, Elizabeth pretends to sleep. She hears Henry heading for the forbidden room and stealthily follows him. Suddenly, Henry emerges from the darkness. He accuses Elizabeth of disobedience. The girl tries to defend herself, claiming she saw nothing forbidden, but Henry explains that the fact of her disobedience is what matters. Frightened, Elizabeth tries to flee but finds all the doors locked. Henry relentlessly follows her. He catches up to her on the stairs, grabs her leg, and throws her down. Then he strikes her with a metal poker. In the next scene, Henry, Claire, and Oliver dig a grave on the lawn and lower Elizabeth's body into it. After the funeral, they sit at the table. Claire asks to say that it is all over, but Henry replies that it is not the end. 6 weeks later, Henry brings in a double of Elizabeth. The same conversations, the same actions. Again, Henry asks her not to enter the forbidden room. Elizabeth promises to comply. They love each other again, while Claire watches them from the shadows. At night, Elizabeth cannot sleep. She walks around the house and finds Claire sitting in the kitchen. Elizabeth strikes up a conversation with her, filled with curiosity, as one question leads to another. Claire tries to warn Elizabeth about something, but Henry walks in and takes his wife to the bedroom. In the morning, Henry leaves, asking Elizabeth to be a good girl. She wanders through the house, calling for Claire or Oliver, but no one responds. Bored, she again tries on clothes and jewelry, swims in the pool at night, and plays the piano in the living room. The forbidden room becomes a magnet, and Elizabeth enters it, only to scream and run out. That night, she dreams a nightmare where the girl from the glass capsule, looking just like her, emerges from her sarcophagus and comes to her room. Meanwhile, Henry arrives, noticing that his wife is frightened. Elizabeth retreats to the bathroom, but Henry realizes she has disobeyed him. He bursts in, grabs her, and begins to choke her, but she kicks him in the face and escapes. Henry chases her throughout the house. In the kitchen, Elizabeth arms herself with knives, while Henry grabs a tampon soaked in ether. He sits at the piano and begins to play. Elizabeth relaxes, hearing the music, but it is a trap. A record plays while Henry stealthily approaches her hiding spot. He grabs Elizabeth and presses the tampon to her face. It seems the game is lost, but in a final move, Elizabeth plunges a knife into him. The couple lies on the floor in a pool of blood. Elizabeth regains consciousness. Henry is dead. She cleans up the blood from the floor and tidies the kitchen. Wrapping Henry's body in fabric, she loads it into the elevator, then cleans herself up. She throws away her wedding ring and burns her blood-stained clothes. The woman calls for emergency services, but she doesn't know her address. At that moment, Elizabeth sees Claire and Oliver and pretends everything is fine. Seeing the live and unharmed Elizabeth, the couple is shocked. Elizabeth claims Henry is resting upstairs. Claire heads to the kitchen, suddenly collapsing from a heart attack. She reaches for the phone and calls for help. The ambulance takes Claire away. Elizabeth tries to leave, but Oliver says he cannot protect her if she goes out the door. He understands that Henry is dead. Frightened, Elizabeth tries to explain that it was self-defense. Oliver reassures her that he hated Henry too and will help her get rid of the body. The young man asks what she remembers from her childhood. She responds that she was in the hospital for a long time after her parents died in a car accident and grew up in an orphanage. Oliver shows her a nearby house, saying that's where they lived together. Claire knows better because she worked with her. Elizabeth asks who she is. Oliver reveals that she is one of 6 clones of Henry's wife. Number 5. The girl is in shock, experiencing a true panic. She wants to return to her honeymoon. Oliver advises Elizabeth to get as far away as possible. She can take money from the safe. The girl goes to her room to pack her things. Oliver enters with Claire's diary in his hands. He asks her to read it. While she tries to decipher the handwriting, Oliver locks the doors. Elizabeth doesn't understand what's happening. She asks to be let out, but Oliver is unyielding. In despair, Elizabeth begins to read Claire's diary. She learns that Claire received an invitation from Henry to work with him because she was a prominent geneticist. When she arrived at the scientist's house, she met Oliver, but when she learned what she would be doing, she became frightened as she found herself in the midst of a tragic love story, one that was inexplicable, unpleasant, and impossible. Henry revealed that his wife died shortly after giving birth to Oliver from a very rare disease. Her genes had suddenly and severely degenerated. The grief-stricken husband cloned her cells and created 6 copies, but the disease manifested in them as well. To buy time, Henry built cryogenic chambers and placed the bodies in stasis. By the time Claire joined the project, only 4 remained. She began working and decoded the disease's gene. Meanwhile, Henry recorded messages and played music for the subjects. He hoped this would form their memories. However, the latest Elizabeth remembered nothing beyond a few seconds, suffering because she lacked a real inner world. The constant tension in her consciousness became too complex for her body to handle. One day, she entered the lab and fled in horror. The police found her and brought her to Henry's house, where Claire recognized her as her ailing niece. The strange accusations from the girl were dismissed as a mental disorder. Elizabeth is distracted from reading when Oliver enters. He brings dinner and asks her to behave, but Elizabeth attacks him, demanding the code to the door. Oliver gives it. The girl heads to the lab, where she sees Oliver working on the body of the latest, 6th Elizabeth. He asks her to support the clone's head. While the 5th copy holds up her clone's head, Oliver injects her with a sedative. In a delirium, Elizabeth sees the memories of her predecessors. She wakes up in a room, chained to the bed. She cannot free herself and continues reading Claire's diary. The woman remembers how they continued their research, but a week later, the clone died. Claire realized that neurodegeneration had resumed. She couldn't handle it. Henry was in despair. Nothing was working. He had wasted so many years and behaved like a madman, but Claire counters that he acted like a lover. A relationship develops between them. Oliver enters the room again. He wants to know what Claire wrote about him. Elizabeth explains that Claire began an affair with Henry after the death of the 3rd subject. The woman didn't know that Henry had altered the samples. This meant Claire had no fault. She had managed to stop the disease, and the remaining clones were healthy. Oliver shares that in childhood he admired Elizabeth because she was the most beautiful being he had ever seen. Yes, he could see back then. The children became friends, which displeased Henry. One day, Oliver saw Henry kiss the girl. That night, the man blinded Oliver. Having recounted everything, Oliver leaves, and Elizabeth continues reading. Claire wrote that she ended the affair herself. Competing with Elizabeth was impossible. Furthermore, Henry spoke about his pain after losing his beloved. Now he dreams of reliving that first wedding night. Claire did not find any records of Elizabeth giving birth and realized that Oliver was not Henry's son. He was Henry himself. He created him because he feared Elizabeth would not want his current self. In the morning, Elizabeth wakes up to the feel of scissors against her neck. Oliver demands she tell him what Claire wrote about him in the diary. Elizabeth admits that Claire considered him a clone of Henry, but that is not true. Henry showed a birth certificate, so Oliver is not Henry. Elizabeth asks if he loves her and invites him to touch her. She removes her pants and beckons him closer. Oliver cannot resist temptation and approaches. He embraces Elizabeth, but the girl throws him to the floor and chokes him with the chain. She has to give him the keys to the shackles and reveal the real code to the door. Just then, another Elizabeth enters the room, aiming a gun. The girls stare at each other. They are identical. Oliver tries to convince the new Elizabeth that the one in the room is sick, that she is an imposter and their enemy. The fifth Elizabeth argues that this is not true. They are hostages and she just wants to leave. Obeying Oliver, the sixth Elizabeth orders the other to lie on the floor, but the fifth Elizabeth shields Oliver. When the sixth finally fires, the bullet kills Oliver and wounds the fifth clone. She tries to escape while the sixth clone weeps over Oliver. The injured Elizabeth exits the house. In her mind, all the visions and images that passed before her clones merge together. A gunshot rings out. The last Elizabeth kills her double. The final breath and last vision, herself, leaning close to her face. Morning comes. The last clone reads Claire's diary. Henry transfers all his possessions to Claire. Now she can continue her research. The man states that he never intended to kill the one he had wanted to resurrect all his life. It just happened. She died, and now she brings him joy by dying again and again. And no one needs to know about it. These versions are not his Elizabeth. Only by destroying them does he feel that they are real, and Henry will do everything to put an end to this. Elizabeth finishes reading. She sees a taxi pull up to the house, from which Claire exits. They meet at the door. Elizabeth leaves everything to Claire, for she deserves it. Elizabeth walks down the road, leaving behind all that is terrifying and incomprehensible. All her life she dreamed of a wonderful man. She stole his heart, and he stole her from all misfortunes into his secret world, but she no longer sleeps. The film prompts a reevaluation of many things. Above all, ethical questions arise. Can a true scientist, called to improve people's lives, use their discovery for personal gain? Is cloning a person without their consent not a crime? Even the greatest love cannot justify violence against a person. And how can one put up barriers to protect a person from such expressions of passion?